So recently on Discord, one of my viewers basically asked me the simple question, what are my 5 favorite video games of all time? While it was very hard to decipher what exactly I considered my favorite games of all time, I decided to not do a top 5, but a 5 favorite games of my past. So with that being said, let's get to it. These are the 5 favorite video games from my childhood. If you grew up around the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, chances are you've probably hung out at a roller rink or two. And during that time when you're just taking a break, eating a pizza, and talking with friends, there was always something you wanted to do while you were there, and that's the arcade. There was always those few games that were always at every single roller rink that you would go to. And one of those games, to me, is my all-time favorite arcade game. That is Caveman Ninja. Now, while I could have gone with the more obvious choices, like, the fighting games that were back in the day, like Mortal Kombat 2 and even Street Fighter 2, or even some of the more popular beat-em-up brawlers like Die Hard Arcade, or Turtles Arcade, or heck, even The Simpsons Arcade, something about Caveman Ninja just stuck out to me a whole lot more. Or maybe it was just a Contra aesthetic that I absolutely loved in this game. While everybody knows about Joe and Mac, nobody knows that its origins title was Caveman Ninja. And I didn't even know about this until years later when I was playing it on the Super Nintendo. And honestly, it's not even a hard game to play, especially if you have 2 players. The arcade version is honestly a bit easier to play against than the Super Nintendo one. But despite all that, you've hardly heard anyone mention about the arcade one more, as opposed to either the NES or the Super Nintendo version. And yes, even the Genesis one. So if there's a chance that you see this at an arcade, or if you have a roller rink still opened up, definitely go and give this game a playthrough. Heck, you may actually find it as a nice little hidden gem that you didn't even know exist. Very few superhero games will get the recognition of being the best Batman game to ever be released on a console. While some people will recognize him more for his beat-em-ups or very similar to the Arkham series, Batman the video game on NES was my first introduction to the Dark Crusader as a video game, and still holds up to this day. While Sunsoft was still around, they had some of the best releases to ever be released on a console. Music, atmosphere, and straight-up gameplay experience makes this one of the best action platformers and easily a top 10 contender for anybody's top 10 list for the NES. And strangely enough, it's a video game tie-in for the movie that was released in '89. One thing that does jump out about this game compared to most other action platformers of this genre is of course the cutscenes. This is around the time when game companies were finally figuring out the best way to make these games look presentable and flashy. And you could literally see every sprite and detail for the cutscenes on the Batmobile, even all the way up to the facial expressions of the Joker. Still to this day, it was really hard to decipher which of the NES library that I loved the most. Batman the video game on NES will probably be my #1 favorite NES game of all time. I didn't really get much experience with the Genesis around the 90s. I think around 1995, my dad had picked up the Genesis for me and my brother to play, and boy was I blown out of the water. Sonic 2, Vector Man, Comix Zone, just to name a few, and there was one game in particular that still to this day is my all-time favorite Genesis title, and that is the one and only Gunstar Heroes. In a similar style of Caveman Ninja, Gunstar Heroes basically is very similar to Contra in every way. From the weapon upgrades to the boss battles, Treasure made one of the best games for any console back in the 90s. And basically I was very shocked to see that this game has never been re-released on any other platform. Heck, I don't even think it was ever released for anything else other than any Genesis collection. But despite all that, the combat still holds up, and it's still one of my favorite games to watch during speedrun events, and even get to be able to replay it over and over again. The game never gets repetitive, and honestly, one of my favorite stages is the board game level. I always go through the first three first, and then I go to the board game level as the last one before the final round of the game. And graphically, it is one of the most impressive games on the system. Treasure really took the time and effort to make these games feel like a national treasure on the Sega Genesis. Even though these are games that most people remember on the Genesis, it still holds its value even in loose cart form. So if you're ready to shell out some good money for an awesome game that you can spend time with your friends and family on, this is one to definitely get for the Genesis. Around this time when Power Stone came out, a lot of people were praising Smash Bros. And while they were mostly playing that, I loved Power Stone 1 and 2. Though while the sequel actually had a lot more to offer as opposed to the first one, I thought that Power Stone 1 was just absolutely flawless as far as gameplay and controls were. Everything about it was perfect from top to bottom. Even the level designs were so perfect in size and design choice. And out of the two games in general, the first one has the more memorable music. Even Falcon's level has some of the most memorable tunes out of like any of this series. And it's the one that I'm choosing for this part of the video. While the final boss was unmemorable to say the least, this one still brings me so much joy to go back to as far as a multiplayer party game. And honestly, as far as price goes, this one is a lot cheaper to pick up than the second one. I would recommend this game so much in a millisecond. So if you get the chance, do so. And definitely have yourself a blast in this one-of-a-kind. There will never be another like it. For a handheld RPG series that is so criminally unused in Nintendo's library, Golden Sun still holds up as being the best RPG game for the Game Boy Advance that is not Fire Emblem. With the help of Camelot to create one of the best RPG experiences that were not developed by Square Enix, Golden Sun sets you off on a journey to go to the lighthouses and to basically get rid of the beacons, so that way the world doesn't go into chaos. From the simple combat to the collecting of the gems, everything just connects so well together. The first one I remember more than the second. I remember the hours upon hours of time that I took to be able to try to complete the game, even through those boss battles, which were so hard. Even the final one, where there was the Chimera Fusion, which took me at maximum 4.5 hours to finally beat the game. When you had summer vacation, this was the game that usually came to mind. And the best part is about this, the game usually goes loose for around $10 to $15. That is a steal for how good this game is. So let me just say this, if you have never ever experienced this game before, or its sequel, get both, and play through them both, and you will definitely enjoy one of the best underappreciated RPG series out there on any handheld platform. Period.